I have to tell you, I saw a fantastic football game last night, Petal Oak Grove. It was Petal. Anybody there last night? My nieces were playing in the band, and so I left here from the dinner to go to the football game. And it was the last quarter, and Petal was marching back the whole time. They played for Petal, and fourth down, 19 yards to go on the 30-yard line. The guy falls back with all the pressure. He throws the ball up in the end zone. The guy catches it, and they win the game. I mean, it was just unbelievable. So. Learning is a contact sport, and very thrilled to be here today. I'm a graduate of USM, and so it's a real honor to be back here, and it's incredibly nostalgic to be here with you today. Anyone have a Windows 8 phone? It looks kind of like this with the different colored bars on it. Anybody have a Windows 8 phone? Okay. Well, I was kind of I don't have one either, but I was inspired to. I have an iPhone, but I don't have the new one yet, and I was inspired to give a little information about you in a different way. So I put this Windows 8 metaphor up here for you about who I am. You see the biggest bar is what? Which bar here is the biggest? Computer geek. That's absolutely true, thus the Windows 8 metaphor. I was a Blackboard system administrator over the community college system, and so and did a lot of teaching and training efforts at the community college board. But I'm also an illustrator and storyteller, and that's a hint and a clue of what I'm going to be talking about today. But first, let's get the stats out of the way. Dr. Davies yesterday talked about the growth in online enrollment, so I thought I'd go over a few slides to give you a barometer of how things are growing. The best record that I could find was from a Sloan Consortium report that was published in 2009, and at that time, the total college enrollment, four-year college enrollment, was at about 18 million, and the total online enrollment was about 5.6 million. And you can see the bottom graph there, it is growing faster than traditional enrollments. This is not news to us. Just earlier this year, this report came out, Conflicted, which certainly has a connotation of negativity. Conflicted, Faculty in Online Education 2012. And I thought I'd talk a little bit about this today. You can download this, it's a free document. It's published in June. It's a joint venture between InsideHigherEd.com and the Babson Survey Research Group. Babson Survey Research Group has been doing research-based reporting on online instruction for more than a decade, and they have partnered with the Sloan Consortium on many of their reports. In this report, they surveyed 4,500 faculty across the country, 3/4 of which are full-time professors. And the results were kind of interesting. 2/3 of them said that there was considerable concern remaining about the quality of the learning outcomes for online instruction. And these are online faculty saying this. But to me, the really interesting thing is where these statistics fall. For institutions with no online offerings at all, 83% believe this to be the case, that the learning outcomes are inferior for online instruction. For institutions with some online offerings, it drops to 69%. And for institutions with fully online program offerings, it's 55%. But nonetheless, for institutions with fully online program offerings, the majority of faculty are saying that the learning outcomes are inferior to face-to-face instruction. What I find interesting about that statistic, institutions that are not experienced in online instruction, the overwhelming majority of them feel that online instruction is inferior. But it gets better as institutions have experience with it, and that's the case with anything. Any of you have a teenage son or daughter who's learning to drive? But you can probably remember when you yourself were learning to drive and you were fearful and you finally were able to drive on the country roads. But then somebody said, your driver's ed coach said, it's time to get out on the interstate, right? And that's when you became a little more fearful. So it's just about being unfamiliar with what this is all about. Here are some really helpful tips to help you grow. I've got 3 or 4 of these kinds of slides here, and I hope these will be helpful to you. In my job at the College Board, I quickly found and quickly discovered value in the Jossie Bass series of online books. These are practical, these are informative, they're written by the nation's experts on online learning. And if you Google Jossie Bass series on online learning, you will end up at the Wiley website where they publish these books. There's a couple of books here I wanted to point out in particular. The one on the far left, Continuing to Engage the Online Learner, is an incredibly practical and helpful book full of icebreakers and activities that you can use to encourage group work, dyad-based activities, engaging icebreakers that really get your students interested in what you're teaching. The second book, Teaching Lab Science Courses Online. This is a hot topic in online instruction, and there's a great presentation later today on that very subject. This is a great book on that. There's even a book about managing online instructor workload. So the books have become more nuanced over time, and very good resources there. Are any of you familiar with this book? There was a presentation at Creating Futures last year by a professor from, I believe, William Carey University on this book. It's called Classroom Assessment Techniques, a Handbook for College Teachers. It was written more than 20 years ago, and it's a fantastic book for face-to-face instruction. But the problem is it's not mapped to online learning. I've used this book many, many times. What I have done with this book, see if I can manage to pull this up here. This is now freely available on the internet, the contents of this book. And if I can scroll over here, figure out which way my cursor has to go. 50 Classroom Assessment Techniques by Angelo and Cross. And these are numbered 1 to 50. There's 50 practical ways that you can assess your students in new and innovative ways. Most of the classes that I've seen in my experience as a system administrator and as a faculty member is that there's a lot of summative assessment. There's really not enough opportunity for students to do that very important formative assessment, that practice that they really need. And so you can take the concept from this book and apply it to online learning. Again, there are 50 of these different techniques in this book, and I thought the book was so useful that I mapped all of these 50 assessment techniques into the tools that we have in Blackboard, the ones that are available to all of you in Blackboard. And I've made this document available for you on the web. I'm going to give you an address in a minute if you want to get a pen handy to write it down. It might be really helpful for you. The website is oercommons.org. I'm putting some resources out there. This is a fantastic site. Has anybody been to OER Commons? OER stands for Open Educational Resource, commons.org, meaning that the public and faculty and practitioners publish things that they found valuable for other people to find and to share and to distribute. If you search CAT to BB LMS map, you'll come upon that. I think this is a beautiful graphic. This is a report that was put out by the Institute for the Future, and I have a kind of a corny joke about that. If you work at the Institute for the Future, do you have to work? Do you have to go to work in the future, or do you have to go to work today? I just love the name, the Institute for the Future. They put out this report called Future Work Skills 2020, and they have identified 6 major drivers for the future student. The green circle that you see at the top left, these are drivers and disruptive shifts that will reshape the workforce landscape. So for the student coming to your college or your community college or your university in just 4 years' time, who will be graduating ideally in 2020, will need to embrace these particular skills. The ability to determine the deeper meaning or significance of what is being expressed, to connect to others in a deep and direct way, to sense and stimulate reactions and desired interactions, a proficiency at thinking and coming up with solutions and responses beyond that which is rote or rule-based, the ability to operate in different cultural settings, to translate vast amounts of data into abstract concepts, and to understand data-based reasoning, to critically assess and develop content that uses new media forms. The key there to me is to develop content that uses new media forms, to develop content. Most of the time we're asking students to open up Microsoft Word and write a paper. But what this is saying is that they need to be versed in many different software applications. And as we know from having a phone, Samsung, an iPhone, applications are prolific. They come out every day by the hundreds and hundreds. Are we using them in our classes? Are we getting our students to think about how they're meaningful? I took these smaller circles on this page, and at the Institute for the Future website, the sentences that I just read to you, where they have identified these things in a very concrete, orderly way in terms of language, and I made a word cloud out of it, because I find a lot of use in looking at a visual representation of the data. Has anyone used Wordle.net to do any of this kind of thing? Okay, do y'all like that site? It's pretty good. This is what I come up with. Can anyone see the word wrote? Where is it? Is it big or small? Incredibly small. Ability is big. Understand is big as well. Desired and concepts are also pretty large. So that's something for us to think about. The challenges are great. There's a great resource that I wanted to talk to you about today. How many of you are looking to build and develop a brand new online class for spring 2013? Let me see a show of hands. Anybody? Okay, I've got a couple of people out there. Maybe you have a colleague as well that's looking to develop an online class, their very first one, and you have resources for an instructional technologist, but maybe you don't have access to that person right away. This is a self-directed guide. It's a PDF document. You can download this. It's called a self-directed guide a self-directed guide to designing courses for significant learning. And through this 12, 13-page document, Dr. Fink at the University of Oklahoma, who is the Director of Instructional Development there, she guides you along the way of thinking about what should the framework look like. How does she get you to identify your own value system? I mean, we're all here because we love teaching students, and I know there are interests in scholarly work and in research work as well, but we love teaching. It's why we do it. This is not geared for online instruction, but it is geared towards tapping into what you hold to be most important to you. She works through assessment. She works through learning goals. When you're finished with this document, over a course of 3-4 weeks working with this, if you hand this to an instructional technologist, they could build you a phenomenal class. I'm convinced of that. And here's the framework that she presents in the book, in the PDF document. There are these 6 central components. This is what she calls her taxonomy of significant learning. She does workshops by this on the way if you're interested in going to a workshop. When I look at this and I think about online learning in particular, where do we do these things in our online class? And this is what I come up with. For foundational knowledge, where this is the knowledge that we tend to provide to our introductory students or to introductory concepts, we're doing this in a discussion board. We're doing this in a wiki, a journal, a blog. Maybe we're using some publisher content to do this. For application, we're using tests and some other things. The concept of integration is about connecting the ideas in our course to other content in our course, or it might mean connecting ideas to other disciplines in meaningful ways. When we look at the other side, though, learning how to learn, caring, and human dimension, in my own experience, this was something I did not do very well for many years, and only recently have begun to incorporate these elements in my class, and it's been incredibly beneficial for me. Learning how to learn. This is where we prompt them to open the conversation about what it means to be a good student in a course like this, or how to learn the particular subject matter of your course, or how to become self-directed. Caring goals. When we introduce ideas in a course that indicate a balance of caring and thinking, we want them to express feelings as well as strong ideas. We are asking them to look inward and determine what they are. And for the human dimension, here we ask students what they could or should learn about themselves and understanding others, or how they interact with others. And it's this one that I'd like to focus the most on today. But first, a little more research. Smarter Measure, Smarter Services. How many institutions here subscribe to Smarter Measure or Smarter Services? This is a web-based link that this vendor provides for you at your institution so that your students can take an online readiness test. Prior to taking their first online class, they go through a test, and it consists of reading comprehension, typing speed, learning styles, and they come away with a profile of what they need to work on in their online class. It's a good tool. So they did a report over a 12-month period and concluded this report in June of 2011. 365,000 student responses. They took a random sample of 2,000 of those responses. And they found that social was the dominant learning style. How many of you are surprised by this? Is there anything on this slide that does surprise you? There was something that surprised me. Visual. 6%. How many of you thought visual would have been a lot higher than that? And so I question that. I'm wondering about that. I see a lot of truth in what this is showing, but I question the visual. Solitary at 14%. If you look at your online class, is your solitary component 14%? It's probably For most of us, it's probably much larger portion than that because it's very difficult to do the group work and it's very difficult to get them in dyads in terms of how we think about that in online learning. All right, so as a summary, actually before we do the summary, I want you to get out the index card on your paper and a pen. And I'm going to try a test. I have no idea how this is going to go, so this will be kind of fun. I want you to imagine that you have two classes. We all have more than that, I know. But imagine you have two classes. One is face-to-face and the other is online. You assign a paper with a promise to your students that you'll have the papers back to your students in 1 week after they're submitted. Okay, so your online students turn in a paper on Monday, your face-to-face students turn it in on a Monday, and you tell them both on the same day, I'm going to have them back to you next week. Okay. On the weekend prior to having those papers ready for your students, there's a crisis at home. You're not able to finish the papers. You can't finish both batches. Which one do you grade and why? Take a minute to write down your response. Okay, I'd love to get an informal poll here, and I'd love to get full participation of everybody in here. How many of you say that you would grade the students that you're going to see face-to-face on Monday? Let me see a show of hands. Keep them up high. All right, y'all help me count here. How many do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 20. Looks like 20. And how many of you say the opposite? You'll do it for your online students. Wow, so I am totally wrong on this. 1, 2, 3. All right, so about 25 or 30. That is fantastic. For those of you who raised your hand to say the online students first, why did you say that instead of the face-to-face students? Okay, good. Let me tap into that right there. You can beg them for forgiveness. And how do you do that? You go to them and you plead, and you give the pretty smile, and you're able to talk to them, and you're able to, say, okay, it's going to be fine. It'd be harder to do that in the online class. You can do that. You can send them that message, but you don't know how they're going to receive the message, right? What are some other reasons why those of you who picked online? Right here. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anybody else want to contribute? I'm seeing a couple people may want to respond. Sure. Oh, good. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm not as fast as I used to be.
That's all right, Amy.
I just want him to repeat what the other person said because I can't hear what the comments.
Right. Dr. Bowen, could you repeat again what you said so I can repeat that, and then I'll go here.
I think she heard me. I think it was the man she didn't hear, but I just said the woman. I'm so sorry. I didn't hear that man either. That's. I just commented that my online students tend to think that I'm online with them 24/7. That they're waiting for me online, and so I would do them first, and to be able to give feedback with them, and then the students I see on Monday, I'll just beg them for forgiveness, and like you said, with a frown and act pitiful.
Yeah. Would you repeat too what you said?
Sure.
So the comment that I had, let me say this in the most feminine voice I have, is that in terms of grading, this is many times a way of reaching out and connecting with your students so that they feel a part of things. So as you give them feedback, that's you connecting with the students.
And don't feel bad about the gender thing. In my classes, they all think I'm a female because my first name's Terry. And I have to correct them all throughout the semester. But finally, I put a picture up there, and I got rid of that problem. But that was a problem for a long time. Well, thank you for that. That was very interesting. I wonder, though, if your peers who are not here, perhaps, who may be more inexperienced, feel the same way. I know that for me, there was a lot of inexperience when I first started this. This was back in 1999, and my very first class consisted of getting 8.5 by 11 envelopes and mailing things by correspondence. I mean, this is how we did it. It came out of the teleconferencing model, and that was what online classes looked like in 1999 for me in North Carolina. I was the first one to teach a class, a composition class, by mail, and that was not fun, believe me. Okay, so to summarize some things I think from the presentation so far. Online enrollments are continuing to rise. Faculty's concerns about online learning outcomes is persistent, perhaps misinformed. Students have a dominant social learning style, and it's challenging to integrate the entire framework of Dr. Fink in our online courses. At least that's my view. It's challenging to do this kind of thing. And I think sometimes it's because of the distance that we take to the online environment. We feel like it's inappropriate in some cases to talk to students about things in an online environment because of the distance between us and them on the screen. And that's the kind of thing that I'd like to change. But how do we change this, right? So I think about this a good bit. And like many of us, I go to the great wise gurus. This is a book that was on my grandfather's shelf when I was growing up. And he had a number of different books. This book always intrigued me. And I was fortunate enough to be able to find this actual cover. This was published in 1968, The Parables of Peanuts. Throughout my childhood, I returned to this book when I'd visit my grandfather. I'd pick it up off the shelf, I'd put it back, I'd look for things that interested me, but when I looked through the book, I found that I could read the comics, and I thought they were hilarious. I didn't understand anything about illusion and metaphor and parables. What the heck is this stuff all about? But it was a really interesting kind of intersection to me between the sequential arts and essay writing. I recently discovered the very first comic strip artist, and I'm going to share with you some of the very first comic strips ever published. This is, I have to practice this, Rodolphe Terpfer. Got his name right. He is the first cartoonist, lived in the early 1800s in Geneva, and he had drawn humorous albums for the private amusement of himself and his students at the school he mastered and taught at in Geneva. But he was resistant to publish any of them until he was afraid it would challenge his budding career as a pedagogue and as a serious author. But when he shared them with several famous people, including Goethe, he realized that he was onto something. This is one of his first comics. This was published by the University Press of Mississippi, and they were kind enough to share these images with me. And I wanted to read part of the bottom here because it's written in French. Preface. So this is a serialized story of about 5 cartoons I'm going to share with you here. Preface. Here begins the true story of Mr. Jabot, and how by his polite manners and his good deportment alone, he managed to succeed in the world. Go, little book, and choose your world, for at crazy things, those who do not laugh, yawn, and those who do not yield, resist, and those who reason are mistaken, and those who would keep a straight face can please themselves. Typically French, right? This is about six comic strips after the preface, where I think the story gets really interesting. In the first panel, judging that the time is now right, Mr. Jabot prepares to dance. Panel 2, Mr. Jabot engages Miss Dubocage in person if, he says, his request is not too ineffective. Panel 3, Mr. Jabot offers some gracious remarks as a prelude to the dance. And the next one, panel 1. His remarks being little appreciated, Mr. Jabot thinks it proper to adapt some tasteful gestures to well-chosen expressions. Panel 2. The expressions having little effect, Mr. Jabot thinks it proper to withdraw into an attitude betraying subtle powers of observation and a tasteful sense of fun. Panel 3. After which Mr. Jabot leads the gallopade with the greatest success. And the last comment, panel 1. Unfortunately, Mr. Jabot slips at a critical moment. Panel 2, which causes some disturbance among the rest of the gallopade. So artful. So in thinking about that, and thinking about my students, and having taught for like the last 13, 14 years online, started putting an index of my composition students. That's what I teach, by the way. I don't think I've mentioned that. From composition up to the lit courses. I began to reflect in the primary courses, Comp 1, Comp 2, what do students deal with the most? And I came up with these things. When I started looking at entering freshmen, I came up with these themes. And now I'd like to have 2 volunteers come up from the audience, please. Any 2? Don't stampede. We don't need a gallopade. All right, I'm going to have to call on some folks here. Krista, Dr. Caraway. If you could, Dr. Caraway, if you would stand on this side of the screen.
I have to have a mic.
and just on that side, right on the corner. And Krista, if you would stand on the other side of the screen there, on the corner. All right, so they'll be doing something for us in just a moment. Let's give them a round of applause right now, though. A little bit more about me. When I was here at Southern, I was in the English department, and my bachelor's and master's were in English here, and so I studied under some phenomenal faculty members here, and really enjoyed language, obviously, and enjoyed storytelling, and began to think about that in the context of all these challenges. So I drew a cartoon, and here it is. My major has become completely useless in the workforce, so I've decided to major in karma. And now we'll ask our volunteers to play the role of my students. These were the responses from my summer course and how they responded to the comic. Dr. Carraway, if you would go first on your side.
As a healthcare professional, the realization of this comic is spot on. Many are obtaining degrees only to graduate and not be able to find a job.
My initial reaction to the cartoon was that she may be on to something there, because if we all had good karma, there would not be an unemployment rate.
What really struck me about the conversation was there was no way I was going to get a response like that. It's completely open-ended as that without a cartoon. They're interpreting it on their own, and these were the two best from the class that I received. But I didn't stop there. I was getting excited, so I drew another one. And I'll read this one to you. So the student in the first panel says she receives a message on paper from her professor. Students, the assignment is to write an essay that is concise, dramatic, and revelatory. The second panel, she gets out her Pepper laptop, because I can't do a Mac laptop, so I'm doing a Pepper. I better get started, she says. And in the last panel, she says, how's this? The end. She types the end. That's it. All right. And so in looking at the responses for this, I realized that not only were they useful to me independently, but they were useful in terms of categorizing these. I found some students that, when I really read them closely, I could find that their own initiative was lacking in terms of what their confidence level was. Other students blamed the teacher. Others pointed to problems between the teacher-student relationship, and then some were just brilliant. They were astute. All right, if you will read this one here for me, Dr. Carraway.
I think that the student writes a 2-word essay because she is not inspired to write about anything.
Inspiration is important.
The teacher didn't give any details such as the topic, font, or anything, so I probably would have wrote, I'm confused for my essay.
In the second panel, the student appears to realize the need for coming up with some ideas, when at the last minute, she makes the decision that a 2-word response is concise, dramatic, and revelatory enough. The student gave up.
There wasn't enough details like how long or how many pages the essay should be. Should the student use MLA or APA? Should it be informing or entertaining?
How many times do our students let us know when we've made a mistake in the instructions of our classes? At least we think they do a lot of time. I think a lot of times they don't. I think they're just not quite comfortable negotiating that space of how do I contact my teacher to let them know about this. That's been my experience anyway. I begin thinking about what I could have done. Thank you very much for the volunteer work. If I could get 2 more volunteers, please. Come on, you know what you're going to do now. There's no drama to it. Let's have a round of applause for them. We need to get some prizes for our volunteers today. But, all right, and I would like, I'm sorry, what's your name on the end?
Hannah Norton.
Hannah, thank you. Hannah, can you play the part of instructor? So put on your instructor hat and your instructor voice and get ready. Okay. And Dr. Bowen, if you'll take on the part of a student, I want you to sound like a student.
Hey, do you want me to read this?
Yeah, Dr. Bowen, you
This
first.
is the part I'm supposed to do?
Yes.
This is my part.
Yes.
Okay. I think that the student writes a 2-word essay because she is not inspired to write about anything.
Thank you. And Professor?
Where do ideas come from? As writers, what process can we follow throughout the week to improve the writing process?
Okay. Before doing these comics, I would have told my students, read chapter 3. And they say, I'm not reading chapter 3. This is a problem I've heard about from everybody, everywhere I go to talk. How do I get my students to read? Whether I'm talking to face-to-face faculty or online faculty, right? But by starting with a conversation, I think I'd have better success. All right, let's repeat this for the next student. Dr. Bowen, you as a student, you begin.
Me again,
Yes.
okay. The teacher didn't give any details such as the topic, font, or anything. So I probably would have wrote, I'm confused for my essay.
Thank you.
She really sounds like a student. Do you tend to point out errors to the professor when you are confused about something? If not, why not?
So the bubbles in blue are the kinds of responses that I could have to my student and open up a conversation and a dialogue, just like the dialogue I'd have in my face-to-face classes every day. Thank you very much for the help. At the end of this composition course this summer, where I introduced these comics for the first time, I began to take note of those that talked about the comics in their course experience. I do a reflective paper at the end of the semester. 12 of them chose to talk about the cartoons, 7 of them did not. And I wanted to share with you those comments that I found most interesting. The two up here at the top are, to me, categorized together. The first one at the top left. I even like the comic he gave us every week because that was a thinking process for me too. It was a way to just stop focusing on one thing and think about many things at the same time. The comics were amazingly drawn. I have to disagree with that. The comics were amazingly drawn and taught us to not only read words, but to read images. They made us use our brains. And the one to me that had the greatest effect was the one on the bottom right. I was really kind of blown away by this. And I'm going to show you the comic that she's talking about right after I read this to you. They had great significance not just for the class, but for everyday life. Another comic that struck close to me was about unfriending someone on a social internet site. I thought about that comic hard before I wrote something that week. I analyzed all the times that I have unfriended someone on Facebook, Twitter, and even MySpace. I learned from this that nothing is going to come out of unfriending them and that it doesn't matter. Through that comic, I did actually delete my Facebook because when it comes down to it, it just causes problems in general. Certainly not anything I was looking for, but I was really touched by that. So here's the comic. This might come out a little better if there were color to it, but he has, his glasses are probably the Google glasses. He's got his iPhone, and both of his feet are having some action there. So I started with this really from an interest in language. The word unfriend entered into the lexicon and the dictionary just a couple of years ago, and I thought that was a neat word, and I wanted to play with it. So I really started thinking about, well, if I've had value for this, maybe other faculty would have value for this as well. So I've put this cartoon up on OER Commons, and I'm putting all of them up there on OER Commons. If you'd like to use them, they're there for you to download and to use. Here's where they might be helpful. In an extemporaneous writing assignment, in an icebreaker, journaling, reflective writing, but also through a web conferencing tool, you could use a comic as an icebreaker. Many times when we go to a WebEx session or a Blackboard Collaborate session or so on, you have music at the beginning and you're kind of getting into the mood of the spirit of the talk. You could do that with cartoons too. So to return to my childhood, I thought, well, why not make this even bigger than this? So I've obviously been working on this idea for a long time. And a couple of years ago, I said, I really want to be a comic strip artist. I want to put a comic strip in the newspaper. So I pursued that actually for a little bit and thought, why in the world would I want to do that? I'm not going to get paid anything. And then I realized, well, I don't want to get paid anything. I want to do it for the art of it and for the love of it. Then I realized that no one's reading in the newspaper, or not as many as are reading it as they read before, or they're reading it online. And then I thought, well, why not try to solve a problem for other people? And so I'm making a big announcement here on my next slide. Can I get a drum roll on the table? So I have a serialized comic strip now called Online You, From Laughter to Learning. And in the cartoon, I have several characters. Help, her, please. The main character, the archetype, is Samantha, who's holding up the laptop, and her best friend, Samantha, who's helping her. And the 89-year-old octogenarian, say that word with me on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Octogenarian. Just love that word. Sounds great. She plays the role as well. And there is a cat and a wireless mouse. I'd like to show you a couple more pictures of this. So here's a comic of Samantha telling her friend that she is going to rally the troops and get everyone to log into the class because the professor sent a nasty message that the students have not logged in yet. This is something very common. in the communication we send to students. So here are a lot of the themes that we're going to explore in the comic. Browser cookies. Browser cookies. We hear about cookies all the time. That's ripe, and the grandmother is going to play a role in the cartoon about cookies. But other themes that are important, like procrastination and password integrity. 1, 2, 3, 4 is the password, right? Communicating with the teacher, navigation, and just a general state of bewilderment, which I think is what a lot of students experience. Here's a picture of Cheese. Cheese is the wireless mouse. So yes, the comic does get silly, but it also gets very serious. This is a comic of Bartleby. Bartleby is the name of the cat. I have to pay my homage to Herman Melville there, who says, "I prefer not to." The cat also has an attitude. But the cat and the mouse work in the computer lab at night and help students with their papers. Another image from the computer lab. Cheese is a wireless mouse, and he doesn't like wired mice, and he thinks they're inferior, so he pokes fun at them all the time. And here's Virginia, the octogenarian. I have to say I really enjoy writing her the most, drawing her the most. The curves and the lines is a real pleasure. And in thinking about her, I was thinking about the non-traditional student. What could be more non-traditional than an 89-year-old student? And then I thought, let me spin that even more. And so what she is a master in hackery and social media, and she surprises everybody. So I thought this would be fun for students. And the nice thing is that with Blackboard, these can be embedded anywhere in Blackboard where you have an HTML editor. This comic can show up in your announcements, it can show up in a journal, it can show up in a blog, it can show up in a discussion board. And so when we look to January 13, the idea being that if your class starts on, let's say, the 14th of January, the comic could magically appear in your announcements page on the 14th, just like it appears on the last page of the lifestyle section in your newspaper. 5 days later, it appears again. There's another comic. A week later, another comic, and then another comic, and so on. And the idea being that they're thematically connected to the things that students are dealing with at the time. The very first time that students log in, they're amazed that they were able to log in. They've received emails, they've received things by mail at home, and they're amazed that they were able to do it in many cases. It's a technical challenge for them. So that on the very first day, they received this comic. I did it, I logged in. Now what? What's the difference between the first panel and the second panel, by the way? About 5 hours. So she's sitting there for about 5 hours. Here's Julie. This is Samantha. I submitted my first online assignment. Why isn't it graded yet? So this would appear about the same time that your students are turning in graded work. And it opens up a conversation about, what did I put in the syllabus? I told you when I would get work back to you. Teacher-student communication. Anyone ever had a problem? Anyone ever have a problem with text-to-speak from your students? I know this may be difficult to read in the back, but the student is typing, Professor Jones, have you graded my assignment yet? Just checking, J/C, THX for thanks. Anybody ever received an email like this from students? Come on now. Okay. Teacher responds back, are you for real? And the student is aghast. This is from a personal experience that I had here at Southern. So Samantha, the main character, says, so our first assignment is to complete the online syllabus quiz, right? Right. Why is he quizzing us on a silly bus? 20 years ago in the speech communication department, a professor, my first semester, handed me a syllabus. I had no idea what he was talking about. What is a syllabus? So I'm playing on wordplay there. I totally bombed. I'm not sure if y'all can even read that in the back. I'm going to read it here. I totally bombed the syllabus quiz. I don't know the school's plagiarism policy, the honesty policy, the Blackboard policy, and the e-learning policy. Did you read the college policy? Read. So the theme of self-sufficiency. We began telling stories in caves 20, 30,000 years ago, and we've been doing it ever since. Mo Willems has a fantastic book that is very much a comic art style book for children, and if you have a small child, they're reading this book. They're fighting over it in the library. My son is 7, and he can't get enough of the Mo Willems books in the library. But it is often serious, and we've all read Doonesbury at some point in time, and he did stir up and talk about a lot of really serious and important issues and opened a debate. So I would love to be in that vein. PhD Comics was written by a student at the University of Stanford, and his very first comic was published in the newspaper at Stanford, and now he is a nationally known speaker and travels the country and talking about his comics and is welcomed everywhere and received really, really well. They're really, really funny about students and what they deal with as PhD students. Anybody seen this comic, by the way, PhD Comics? See, so there you go. We've got 5 or 6 people who've seen this. But it's often more serious as well. There's a book called Mom's Cancer, which is exploring very serious issues. There's a book called Epileptic, which is about a brother's story about his brother who had epilepsy and their struggles as children. Serious themes. There is a Canadian named Kate Beaton who is really turning this upside down. She's phenomenal. She has a history emphasis, so those of you with a history bent would love to see her comics. She introduces characters from the past in a modern-day context and a modern-day setting, and educators are using her cartoons in face-to-face classes all the time on any of these topics. Her Wonder Woman comics are absolutely hilarious. Graphic Medicine is published by an individual who is deeply interested in the intersection between humanities and medicine. And this is part of the role that I'm playing at the University of Mississippi Medical Center, where one of the primary focuses is on the healing arts. But there's a humanities initiative to add some value to teaching in the curriculum, whether we're talking about sequential art or poetry or writing or reading. So Online U, a webcomic for online learning, you can download this and use this at OER Commons. I have a lot to publish and post. I have not published a lot of the things there yet, but that's where I'll be posting it. You can search for me by name and you'll find it. It's very simple to use the tool. You can go to onlineucomic.com and you can scroll through the comics if you'd like to look at them one by one. And an idea that I'd like to pursue, and I need to talk with the Blackboard folks about, is the capability for you to download a zip file and import that into your spring class so that the comics are already populated with particular questions that you can delete if you don't like them. You can create your own, things like that. That would be helpful, Hannah, you think? Yeah, I thought that might be helpful. And then lastly, I thought I could make this available through RSS. RSS, you've heard about RSS before. All it really means is it's a simple link. It's an HTTP link that you can put into your class, and you could put anywhere where you have an HTML editor. And so these comics could appear wherever you'd like them to be in your class for students to enjoy. onlineucomic.com. Here's my contact information. If you'd like more information, I'll be around later. This has been a real pleasure, a real honor. It was a lot of fun preparing for today. It was great to be here. Thank you very much.